And I'd like to introduce you to Nancy Mead, who has walked this walk how many times, Nancy?
Six.
Six times. So I'm sure you're going to get into some of that during your presentation. So if you could all gather around and listen up. Nancy, it is all yours.
Thank you. Thank you, thank you. Okay. 25 years ago, I read an article in, of all places, Gourmet magazine. It was about a route that I knew nothing about called the Camino de Santiago. It was interesting, and I thought, sounds like something I should do sometime. And there was basically no information about it at all. Very few people walked it, and so I'll tell you what I found. Camino de Santiago is one of the three major pilgrimage routes in Christianity. The other two are to Rome and to Jerusalem. It's a pilgrimage to the northwestern corner of Spain, where the relics of St. James are believed to be buried. So, Camino de Santiago, what does it mean? Exactly what it says. Camino, the way of Santiago, St. James, way of St. James. St. James was one of the apostles. He may or may not have been a missionary in Spain. He was beheaded by Herod Agrippa around 44 AD. And according to the Spanish tradition, his headless body was taken in a stone boat to Spain and buried in a field. 800 years later, a shepherd found it, guided by a star. Santiago de Compostela, St. James, the field of the star. Many people believe that the Camino is a single route, but in fact, it is a huge, vast network of routes, because when you think about it, medieval pilgrims walked from their own homes to Santiago. At the height of the Middle Ages, 250,000 people were walking to Santiago, a lot of people. Today, pilgrims walk with two things. They walk with the scallop shell, which symbolizes that they are pilgrim to Santiago, and they carry what's called a pilgrim's passport, otherwise known as a credential. The credential is what they need to get into the refuges where they spend the night, and also at the end of the Camino, they present the credential with the stamps, which they put in 2 a day, and they are given the credential, the Compostela, which is a religious document given by the church that says that they have walked the way. So, pilgrims take their scallop shell and their credential, and they walk. And they follow the yellow route, the yellow arrows, which are on most of the routes throughout Europe. And there are many, many ways to go. This is a little bit of what the route looks like. It's exquisitely beautiful. Just a sample. Sometimes you go over the mountains. Sometimes you're on a Roman road. Sometimes you get to walk through a field of poppies. When it's dry, it's very dry. The fall, fields of pumpkins. Pilgrims walk in all weather. In the summer, it is very hot in the south of Spain, and the road cracks. In the fall, it's very rainy, and those cracks are replaced by this mud. Pilgrims are like the post office. They just keep walking. They go through the cities, and this is a beautiful stretch along the beach. And then sometimes there are surprises. Walking along the beach, you come to a screeching halt, and there's a little sign that says, "Wait here, the ferry will be here soon." And the little red boat comes, and the dock goes out, and you pay your €1, and they stamp your credential, and they take you over to Santander, and that saves you 26 kilometers, which, for those of you who don't know, is about 15 miles and a good day's walk. In Bilbao, even more fascinating, you can take this transporter, which is an aerial ferry, one of 2 working in the world. And you can go on the ferry, or if you're really brave, you can climb up and walk across the top. Pilgrims have all the time in the world, so we did both. Pilgrims walk all year round. This woman walked in the winter. I did not. The days start early, frequently before the sun comes up. If you're timing it right, you're drinking a glass of wine when the sun goes down. But some days the sun goes to bed before you do, and you come in the dark. Now, I told you about the passports and the credentials. Pilgrims stay in places called refugios or albergues. They're co-ed. There are between 8 beds and 100 beds in a room. They're very noisy. They're very crowded. They're wonderful places to stay to get to know other pilgrims. But occasionally, you need a nice, quiet night. This is my friend Barbara. We stayed in this very quiet place. The windows were all broken. There was no electricity. There was water, but not hot water. And it was pouring rain, and we were warm and dry. Well, more or less warm and dry. Since the Middle Ages, pilgrims have also stayed in hospitals that were founded by monasteries and convents, and also kings and queens. This was started as a hospital by Ferdinand and Isabella, and you can stay here too. It is now known as the Parador in Santiago de Compostela. And they still give an inexpensive pilgrim's lunch every day for 10 pilgrims. So, what do pilgrims do when they walk? It's like this train sign. They stop, they look, and they listen. When you look around, there's a lot to see. If you drove by this road, it would look quite fine. But if you walk down it 2 miles an hour, it's a whole nother world. Sights, smells, sounds. There are cuckoos in the woods. This is cistus, and if you don't know what cistus is, if you know what incense is, you know what it smells like. There are 70 different kinds of wild orchids in Spain. When you're walking slowly, you get to look carefully at them. This is a man orchid, and if you look at the little paper doll figures, they are anatomically correct man orchids. Now move the slide. The butterflies come out in the afternoon, and they are incredibly beautiful. If you look at this one closely, you'll see that its little black and white feelers match its little black and white feet. And this is a blue butterfly, and I tried for 16 years to get a good picture of this butterfly. And finally, one day, sitting in the middle of nowhere eating an orange, this butterfly landed on my finger, on my map, stayed long enough to get my camera out and take some pictures. And when he opened his wings, it was my friend, the blue butterfly. So good things come when you sit slowly. Nobody pays attention to snails, but if they're red, green, and yellow, and you're moving slowly enough, it's fascinating to watch the snail cross the road. This is a slug. Generally in my world, they're really awful. But again, if you look at this slug, it's about 6 inches long. It's sleek and black and looks like licorice. But if you look carefully, there are all these little brown feet, which you can see all the way around it. When was the last time you looked at the backside of a mushroom or sat and looked for 4-leaf clovers? There are lots in Spain. They're huge. And I would just say don't put them in your passport, because customs doesn't like it when you come in with all these pieces of green vegetation. The spider web is in the morning, and I think it's one of my favorites. Spiders have been spinning web for 318 million years. I looked this up. The average spider lives for 2 years, and by the age of 17 can spin a perfectly formed web. The more mistakes in the web, the older the spider that spun it, which is one of the reasons why scientists are using spider webs for study in Alzheimer's disease and strokes. And medical people use the nylon or the web. It's as strong as a nylon rope, and it's very stretchy. So used in sutures and in tendon replacement. Walking along the rocks is quite fine. Some of the rocks are better than others. This is on the Camino del Norte, and for 8 miles you are privileged to walk on a World Heritage Site called the Zumaya Fleisch route. These rocks are 100 million years old, and they were formed by the collision of tectonic plates. And little closer view, the colors are amazing, and here's another indication of what they do. And there's a museum here, and somewhere on this picture is the exact spot geologically where the asteroid hit Earth and destroyed the dinosaurs. Not too far away, if you're out in this beautiful green country where there's a lot of rain, underneath it there are limestone caves. They're about 50,000 years old, and there are 100 on the Camino routes, various routes, and the cave paintings are incredible. If you're down in the south on the Via de la Plata and somebody says, walk up on the hill and look at the Roman ruins, do it. We walked up on the hill, and here was this Colosseum from the village of, or maybe city, of Italica, founded in 206 BC by Scipio. And this Colosseum was big enough to hold 25,000 people. And beautiful, beautiful mosaics. And they're restoring the houses one by one. And little aside, the emperors Hadrian and Trajan were born here. If you go on the Mozarabic route, you come to Cordoba, and this amazing edifice, which started as a pagan temple, became a church. It was outgrown by the Christians. They gave it to the Muslims, who turned it into a mosque. When the Muslims were driven out, the Christians took it back and put a cathedral in the middle of it. And now they're squabbling over what it should be called and who is to have charge of it. And there are lots and lots of churches that you pass on all the routes. There are 3 octagonal, Knights Templar, amazing cathedrals. Leon has some of the most spectacular glass you would ever see in your life. It's not just 1 layer of stained glass windows, it's 2 and then a 3rd tier. And you look at it and you think, how does it stand up? There's a tiny town called Los Arcos, and it's a tiny town, but it has a huge church. Most of the treasures of the little churches now have been put into diocesan museums, and they are amazing repositories of church art, literature. This is a copy of the Codex Calixtinus, which is a book that was written in the 12th century and was actually the first guidebook to Santiago. There's lots of information about traveling to Santiago in the 12th century. Beautiful sculptures, charming sculptures. I don't know that I've ever seen a picture of the Holy Family taking the child Jesus for a walk, but I do like this. It wouldn't be a church museum without vestments, and in this one they have liturgical shoes in every one of the colors with exquisite embroidery on them. Not to be outdone. Yeah. Yes, yeah, they were unbelievable. Not to be outdone, in the tiny town of Getaria, there is a museum dedicated to the art and artistry of Cristobal Balenciaga, and he was the son of a seamstress and a fisherman, and went on to become one of the most famous clothes designers in the world. Speaking of museums, if you walk through Guernica, there's the Peace Museum, and Guernica was the little town that was bombed by Hitler's planes at the behest of Franco during the Spanish Civil War, and was the reason that Picasso painted his iconic painting Guernica. If you walk through Bilbao, you walk right by the Getty Museum, and I would say that it's better outside than in, but that's just a personal opinion. If you're lucky enough to be in any city during Holy Week, it is incredible. The daily Gospels of Holy Week are taken out onto the street in a combination of music, statues, candles, flowers, and each parish has its distinctive colors. And from the children to the oldest in the parish, people walk and carry huge statues, and the pointed cone heads that you see, unlike in America where they're symbols of hate and the Ku Klux Klan, in Spain for 1,000 years they have been symbols of penitence and sorrow, with the thought that their sins are known only to God. And so it's very moving. And penitents walk barefooted, carry crosses, and it goes on every night and is different. If you're in the south, in Seville, the same thing happens, but with the silver and gold opulence for which Seville is known. And so you keep following those arrows and you walk, and you've looked at it a lot, and you probably think that I'm either a botanist or a geologist or artist. And what about the people? Well, the scallop shell is basically your calling card, and every time you meet somebody, you stop and you talk, and the first two questions are, where are you from and why are you walking? So, man on the left is from Barcelona. The man in gray is from Brazil. They met walking on the Camino and decided that they would come back and meet and walk again. I'm in the green, and on the extreme right is Barbara, and Barbara and I met 21 years ago on the Camino, and she and I have been lucky enough to go back almost every year for the last 21 years and walk somewhere, some Camino route. So friends are made on the Camino. I took this picture in the year 2000. It was the year I took my first Camino. I was turning 50, and I wanted to walk about that. But the real reason I was walking is that I had spent a lifetime of having debilitating panic attacks, and I thought I was going to walk and see if I could tackle them and maybe find a little courage on the way. And St. Augustine has a wonderful saying, solvitur ambulando, it is solved by walking. I think he's right. A lot of reasons people walk. This couple was from Seattle. They worked for REI. He was a marathon runner. She was an Iron Mom. And they had every toy that REI could put in their backpacks. And they were dying. Their backs were sore. They had blisters all over their feet. And they were sending home tents and giving away water systems and leaving things by the side of the road. And they learned that traveling light is definitely the way to go. We met this wonderful man. He was on his way back from Santiago. His wife had died, and he didn't know what to do, so he decided he would take his grief and ride his bike to Santiago. And as I say, we met him on the way back, and he was going home to Paris, and he was 80 years old. These two women were walking in Thanksgiving for recovery from serious health issues. And the picture of the man in gray was a priest from Mexico, and he was carrying on his backpack those ribbons. Each was a prayer from one of his parishioners who had asked him to take their griefs to Santiago. And the young man on the right was a kid from Florida, in fact, and he was walking to determine whether he had a vocation, and he was very sweet. He stopped me on the side of the road and asked me if I was a Christian and was I an Episcopalian by any chance, and yes, and great, will you say noon prayers with me? Oh, so what you're seeing is this very techie kid and I read the noon prayers off of his Book of Common Prayer app. The first for me. Pilgrims, when they walk, generally carry a stone from home, and that stone symbolizes a pain, a burden, a sadness, and this is the Cruz De Ferro. It's one of the highest points on the Camino, and the tradition is you climb up this big rock pile and you say a prayer and you leave your burden at the foot of the cross, and that's a really special place for all pilgrims. And even if they don't walk this route, you will find crosses on other routes and piles of stones. So it's very special. So I've told you about looking and listening and interacting with other people, but really the transformative part of the Camino is when you walk alone, when you look into your heart, you listen to your heart, you spend time thinking about your family. I mean, luxury to spend an hour on each member of your family. You think about your sadnesses and your triumphs and your embarrassments, and you have good conversations with yourself and good conversations with God. And you walk and you think the world is beautiful, the people in the world are amazingly kind, and how lucky you are to be where you are, and just gratitude and all good things, just walking along. I mean, no pictures can describe that. But there are lots of good things that happen on the Camino, and I'll just tell you a couple here. Walking along one day, car drives up and says, when you get to my farm, let me know and I will take you across the river on my tractor, because there's been a lot of rain and you can't get across. So we went across this huge river hanging off this tractor. And so we had our Camino angel. Another time we were lost, and up through the woods came some sheep and a shepherd, and through a series of pantomime and scratching in the dirt, he told us to go through the gate, shut the gate. At the crossing, at the intersection, always go left, siempre izquierda, and the gate and through and to the left. And he said after 1 hour you'll meet another shepherd and he'll give you more instructions, and he did. And we were saved by that good shepherd. Another time I was walking by myself to Finisterre and I got lost in the woods and it got dark. And I don't mind staying in the woods, but I had seen lots of snakes that day, and the idea of the snakes and I spending the night was not a good thing. So I heard some dogs, and I followed the dogs, and ended up in a little hamlet. And a man came out and said, "I will drive you to the town." He knocked on the door and opened the woman up who had closed the hotel. She gave me a room, and the next morning I said, "Please, can I have his name? I need to thank him." And she said, "Oh, yes, his name is Jesus." His name is Jesus. Okay, so we have the Camino angel, and we have the Good Shepherd, and now we have Jesus. And so my last story on that is we were walking into Santiago. It was dark. We followed these two lights. The lights stopped. We talked to the men standing there, and we walked into Santiago together. And this was their story. Two men met in Roncesvalles, day one of basically a 40-day trip. The shorter man had been assigned to the top bunk, and he couldn't get in it. The tall man said, "That's easy, we'll switch." They got up the next morning and thought, this 100-bed sleeping is not for us. They agreed that they would meet each night and share a hotel room. They shared a hotel room. They started having dinner together. They started having breakfast together. They started walking together. And here's their story. One was an Opus Dei Roman Catholic, married with children, very against same-sex marriage, worked very involved with pro-life, and thought that Donald Trump had been elected to save the world. The other was a married homosexual, atheist, worked for death with dignity, and he thought Donald Trump should be hung. And they walked together for 40 days, and they told us this, and they both cried and we cried. They said, we listened to each other, we argued, we laughed, we cried, but at the end, our eyes were open, our hearts were open, our minds were open. They said, we probably haven't changed our opinions too much, but we respect that there are other opinions. And the four of us stood on, this is called the Monte de Gozo. This is where the pilgrims can first see Santiago. And it's really the first time, if you've walked a long way, that you think, yep, I can do this, I'm going to get there. And we watched the sun come up and thought that there was the Good Shepherd, and there was the Camino Angel, and there was Jesus, and then there was Jesus himself. And I love this crucifix because it's, here he is, our Lord. He's reaching down to haul us up, and I think that pretty much symbolizes the Camino. And then you arrive in Santiago. You see the cathedral. St. James is up overhead. You have your picture taken with your family. If you're lucky, your husband appears to celebrate your 50th birthday, my good husband, in the back. And then all pilgrims traditionally would walk up through, this is called the Puerta De Glory, and it depicts all of the characters in the Bible. The tree of Jesse is in the center. Our Lord is in glory at the top, and underneath him is Santiago, a saint and pilgrim to his own shrine. And it has just been redone, and it's beautifully redone. And the tradition is that pilgrims put their hand onto the tree of Jesse, and I don't know if you can see my hand, but the grooves are about 1/4 of an inch deep in the marble where pilgrims for thousands of years have been putting their hands. And then the second part is you knock your head on a statue of Master Matteo, who was the architect of this beautiful building, in hopes that some of his genius will knock into your head. Anyway, and then on to the high altar, and here's St. James waiting for you, and next tradition is you walk up behind and you hug the apostle and give thanks for arriving, and then down into the crypt and leave your prayers in front of the casket. Off to the pilgrim's office to pass in your passport and get your Compostela, and then back to get in line to go to the cathedral for the Pilgrim's Mass, which is for the pilgrims, but also for the tourists. This is a 4-foot tall, 150-pound incense pot for you high church people. It takes 8 people to swing it, and swing it does. It goes from the ceiling to the ceiling and spews out smoke and ashes and all sorts of things. And photographs are not allowed, but that doesn't seem to stop anybody, including me. And so I sat on the ground and took this picture, and I sat beside my walking partner, who is a lapsed Presbyterian, who does not like organized religion but loves relics and bones. And I sat beside the Opus Dei Roman Catholic and the atheist and cradle Episcopalian. And the four of us sat on the floor and gave thanks to St. James for all the amazing things that had happened to us on the way, and decided that he may or may not have been there, and his bones may or may not be buried in the crypt, but it didn't matter. St. James was there with us, and he had drawn each one of us there, and he had transformed each one of us, and we knew that we would go home changed. Now, did you notice that I never said a word about receiving the Eucharist or taking communion? In the cathedral these days, you are now told in 5 languages, English, Spanish, German, French, and Korean, that if you are not a Roman Catholic in good standing, you are not invited to the altar. And after walking together with many people, this is sad and hurtful. This is Bishop Don Carlos Lopez Lozano. He is the Bishop of the Reformed Episcopal Church of Spain, just the Spanish Episcopal Church. His diocese is the entire country of Spain. His diocese has been a member of the Anglican Communion for 150 years. He has 48 parishes and 20,000 baptized communicants. And it's a very poor diocese. The average salary for the clergy, including the bishop, is €12,000 a year. Think about that, €12,000 a year. And he's definitely my hero. He's been the bishop for 35 years. He has opened 25 new churches. He has closed none. Last year, when the Diocese of Europe closed 4 churches, he agreed to take them on and care for them also. His cathedral is tiny. There's a bishop, there's no dean. He has 2 priests, 2 deacons, 8 services a week. They teach an Alpha course. He gives a weekly lecture on the Anglican Communion. They have 10 AA meetings. They provide free English classes, 2 days of feeding programs. And in Salamanca, he has started a center for students with 32 rooms where they can live, and feeds them 3 meals a day plus a snack. And recently he started an orphanage for orphans, or a school for orphans who came from Africa. And there they are taught Spanish, English, and learn a trade. And his dream is to open an Anglican center in Santiago to minister to the pilgrims who come through. And his dream has become my dream. And what we want to do is to secure a building and start a ministry which ministers to anybody that comes into Santiago with any questions about the faith, and to have a chapel where male and female clergy may celebrate the Eucharist, and where Protestants are welcome at the altar, and a place where everybody can rest and reflect and talk about what they want to do and what they have seen and done. And here he is. This is a group of youth leaders from the Diocese of Colorado, and he loves to go on pilgrimage with any of the groups, and he is a prodigious walker. And the little circles, and they're on the fan in the back, are all places where he already has facilities to minister to pilgrims. And Santiago is just coming on the board. This is a picture of the bishop in Santiago. He has great relations with the cathedral there, and in fact is frequently invited to participate in the services. And he has a special relation with the bishop there, and if a group of Anglicans arrive in Santiago, the bishop may have a service for them in a private chapel, and that's great, but it is a 5-hour drive each way for him to do this. So this is a group of UTO pilgrims, and this church is St. Susanna's. It was an unused Roman church, and just recently they have allowed the bishop to use it, and so he has a new congregation that he's established, and this will be our temporary home until we get our ministry up and running. So the columnist Arthur Brooks wrote a article on Santiago and his pilgrimage, and he said, in his opinion, the Camino de Santiago was the greatest tool of evangelism that the church had had in centuries, and to not take advantage of it was a mistake. And I truly believe that more and more people are not going to church, but more and more people are finding God on the Camino, and our goal would be to be there and meet them when they got there and answer their questions and hopefully send them home with tools to grow in their faith and to continue on the pilgrimage of life. So I would say to you, St. James is there. He has been there for 12 centuries. He is a force, and in my world, he's definitely alive and well. And so I would say I have great gratitude for the Camino and for the bishop, and I want to be able to somehow give back for everything that has been given to me. And I would leave you with these two things. If you haven't walked the Camino, take a stroll for your soul. It will change your life. It changed mine. And if you could see your way to have the bishop's dream and my dream become your dream, I would ask you to support the Anglican Center in Santiago. So,